Thanks, sir. So we were lucky enough to get invited by Eric to come down and talk with you about Info Ranch Group and the impacts, what we're around, what we see in the marketplaces throughout the state. I guess I'll start real quickly a little bit about us. My name is Dan Murphy. I'm one of the owners of Info Ranch Group. We're based throughout the Mountain West, and so we've been very fortunate. We're a local company, born and raised Gunnison High School, Western State. I went to Fort Lewis. My wife's a graduate from Western. My son's at Western now. My daughter's in high school here in town. So this is our base. We travel like there's no tomorrow. I mean, my poor truck, I think it had 82,000 miles in 14 months. So it's one of those things, we live on the road. But this being home, this is where our family ranch is and where our business is as well. So this valley holds a tremendous amount of respect, I guess, from us. Right now, Info Ranch Group has got a little bit north of 23,000 acres deeded land under contract in Colorado since the first of the year. So we're very blessed to have an opportunity to find success and live here. Like I said, we travel around a lot, but we have found that success on the same types of properties that this valley has to offer. So what you guys have seen in the 44 years that I've been here, my family's been here, the dynamics of what we've seen change in the Gunnison Valley have been pretty severe. The definition of a working cattle ranch is non-existent. So there's no one that's going to come into this valley, buy a ranch, and pay for it by running cows. It's not going to happen. And so the numbers are too high. The demand is too high, and the available seasons are non-existent when it comes to that. So from our standpoint, we've built our company around trying to make sure that we're protecting the way of life that we grew up in and love. So through conservation easements, trying to identify how to use NRCS, how to really implement the change of the future, which has been wildlife and recreation for us. The valley has seen a tremendous impacts when it comes to that. Our number one things here are live water properties. So when you see properties in the Gunnison Valley, Class A is Class A. And so if you've got Pretty River, whether it's a good economy or a bad economy, you got Pretty River. And so those numbers always seem to kind of follow the value of the land. The dry land stuff, we've run into some unbelievably difficult problems with the sage-grouse issue for people getting building permits. We've had ground basically condemned in this county with the sage-grouse issue. And so case in point, 100 acres out on Blue Mesa, spent 3 years trying to conserve it, 3 years trying to trade it to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, 3 years trying to do a deal with the Park Service. At the end of the day, they didn't want to conserve it. They didn't want to buy it. And so we said, fine, my wife and I'll buy it. We'll put a ranch on it. Well, they wouldn't let us have a house, wouldn't let us restore the valley, wouldn't let us put back the water rights. So, I get frustrated at Gunnison County when I see those kind of dynamics taking away we're 82% public, and then you take away what's unbuildable via terrain or water or floodplain, and we have a very, very small window of buildable land in Gunnison County. It's tiny, and then we've gotten into a situation where 82% plus the other 10% that's not usable isn't enough, and the private landowner still gets taken away. So there's been a change in these last, 3 years? I'm asking, but we seem to have a broader perspective. Yeah, at first it was we ended up with some real ego battles, and now it seems like Gunnison County is coming to a new place. In my opinion, a very positive place. You look at our numbers, and my wife and I just built a little house in Van Tile. And so for our kids to go to school, I think we put $320,000 in building it. It's assessed at $400 today. It's in a year. And so, those numbers are outstanding when you own something. The problem is you can't get in and buy anything. So if you sell, you're leaving is really what it boils down to. So it's an honor to live in a place like this. I think we need to have a little bit more of a broader perspective on how we treat the limited amount of private lands that are here and protecting the landowner more than we have. And so it'll be interesting to see where that goes in the future. But the land use resolution has both helped and hurt. I mean, in all honesty, it's got some real positives. I mean, and I'm not an LUR fan, but I believe in some of the things that have come about from this inadvertently. And lighting, for example, is a huge deal. You know, the LUR requires that you have all down lighting, and that is a giant positive. And you would never think about it unless you had somebody say, hey, wait a minute, what about down lighting? Well, the night skies, you know, one of the things we market to as a company is what the U.S. prints and identifies dark skies areas. So there's maps throughout the Mountain West that identify what areas are the best for getting night skies. And of course, we're in the middle of one of those. And that's a marketable asset for us. And so those kind of things are real positives that come out of the LUR. If we can continue to grow some common sense with the limited amount of private land that we have, we're going to see a real positive long-term impact with the development here in Gunnison County. As far as value goes, you guys have seen what's happened here when it comes to acre value. I mean, the river value statewide average is about $9,200 an acre on an agricultural piece that's on live water. And you start looking at irrigated, Gunnison Valley will produce roughly $5,000 an acre here for irrigated ground. Our dry ground, the closer you get to Crested Butte, the higher that number is. Ohio Creek, I guess I'd call that the Valley of the Kings. That is a spectacular valley with some unbelievable improvements that have driven some real dynamics. When you go south to Powderhorn, you know, you may see dry ground in the $1,700 to $2,200 an acre range. But if it's tied into irrigated or access, you got year-round access, those numbers are going to influence greatly. The big thing about me coming here today was just having an opportunity to maybe answer some specific questions about what you had about the trends we're seeing in the valley, or where you specifically are looking to go on your property. I've got some listings in here in the room right now on some ranches that we have that are some spectacular mountain properties, and that demand, that in this economy, frankly, that demand is growing. We're seeing one of the best markets we've ever seen, and it'll be interesting to see. We're catching up to let me rephrase that. We're catching up to 2007 is really what it boils down to. But the marketplace right now, we're seeing people from the Eastern Slope, which I don't know is a positive, discover the Gunnison Valley. And so that travel corridor in the past stopped at Salida. And so we really didn't see much of the Eastern Slope tourism basis or second homeowner have an impact over Monarch. Now, for the first time, our South Fork office, we have offices throughout the West, but our South Fork office sees 39% out of Colorado Springs, but very little out of Denver. This region, we're starting to see Denver have an impact here. 5 hours is now in the window. And so Lake City is even starting to see a little bit of that Denver marketplace. And so Vail Mountain, Bine, Mount Crested Butte, there's no question that's going to have an impact. A lot of advertising going into that region for tourism over here. And mainly our buyers are either financially secure second home buyers or people who are really sick of being in Denver or Texas or wherever it might be. But there's 1,000 different directions we can go in today. Does anybody have any specific questions about their property or what they're wanting to do, or questions about the types of properties they own? I was afraid of that. Come on, Zedra, you gotta have no. Well, if there's anything we can help with, let us know. We'd be glad. Yes, sir.
Rumor that Keebler Pass is going to be paved someday. Wouldn't that bring a bunch more people into Crested Butte?
It's definitely, that has been on the books for a while. This last year, they did some work, I was told, on that same scenario. It'd be interesting to see, because that would be a direct shot that would take away quite a bit of the travel corridor and bring them right down the valley. So if that does happen, I think that you would continue to see, and it will at some point. You know, I mean, the dynamics are all moving from there to here. We're seeing Grand Junction and Montrose start to show up on our smaller parcels. And so the medical industry, the legal industry, those have been two of our big impacts out of both those corridors, are now starting to show up over here for recreational property. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic that we haven't seen in the past. The bulk of our really, really high-end stuff that transfers here in the valley comes from typically three industries. It comes from technology, comes from energy, and it comes from financial. So that's Chicago, New York, LA. That's who we typically see those venues come from. And then once you get down to the normal numbers, we start seeing that from all over, predominantly Texas in this part of the world, Kansas, Oklahoma, and then California has really affected north and south. We haven't seen as much here in the Gunnison Basin, but our Pagosa office sees predominantly California. Steamboat sees predominantly California. So it's been kind of an interesting dynamic that's I don't know why we have pocketed like we have from those specific regions. This one's easy to explain. This was the home of the Rio Grande Railroad, and so in the old days, in the 30s and 40s, when it got too hot to sleep on your sleeping porches, guys got on the train and they came north to cool off. And that's how from La Veta to here really kind of became the generational home to those South Texas, Kansas, parts of Oklahoma owners. And those families there's a lot of those families that are still here today. So California is a totally new move for us. It'll be interesting to see how much more that continues to grow like it has, but that brings some interesting dynamics with it as well. So one of the big things we do that we see, just kind of fill you in a little bit on particularly what we see as big gains on these properties. Typically, if you can find something that's got what we call ugly river. So historically, if you look back at all of our western ranches, once we got bulldozers, we pushed the rivers to the edge of the valley. So we historically pushed every river to the mountainside, and we opened up the hay meadows in the bottom. Well, by doing that, we historically took out the sinuosity of the streams. So we ate up a ton of river in the Mountain West. I mean, a ton of river. And so where we see guys make the biggest financial gains is coming into places, like I said, called with Ugly River, where we can look at aerial imagery and see historically where those rivers used to meander through those hay meadows. And we'll come back to a 404 permit, engineering, wetland delineation, 404 permit, design work, and build a new river enhancement project on those streams. And so we'll put those streams back into their historic travel corridors. So it slows the water down, gives us an opportunity to build deeper, better habitat for fish at our altitude and our temperatures. The recreation values just skyrocket. So that's one way we see guys do quite well on these mountain ranches over time. Conservation easement is a huge friend, huge benefit, to be honest with you. We conserve tens of thousands of acres. Well, let me rephrase that. We try to conserve tens of thousands of acres every year. We're working on a couple right now that are stunning. Those impacts are long-term. I mean, we make a real difference. And a lot of that deals with grasslands. It deals with endangered species. It deals with water rights that are tied to a piece of property. Those things are all looked at in a big picture. There's a lot of ways to work through a conservation easement to extract value and keep your land and keep the maintenance, keep the type of historic uses that really protect how I've been raised. It's something that I think is admirable, and if we can maintain that Western way in some form and do it respectfully, then we end up with a real win. The biggest thing that I see as a potential change in the state of Colorado is to change our tax code. If you look around some states that are close to us, nearby, adjoining, there's value in wildlife, agricultural value in wildlife. So you actually get an agricultural tax credit for wildlife on your land. So that mentality has changed the entire dynamic of what you improve, pasture, the types of grasses you put in, the bottom line of being happy to have wildlife on your property. About 82%, Danny, you might be able to help me with this. Is it 82% of our wildlife winters on private land in the state of Colorado? I think that number's right. It's right in there. It's 82%. So all the private landowners own all the bottoms of the valleys. Well, in the winter months, all that wildlife drops down, so all the agricultural producers end up paying for the rest of us to have great wildlife in the state of Colorado. That's what it boils down to. So building a system to protect their investment by protecting their ag status on top of giving incentive for wildlife improvement is where the direction of our mountain ranches are going. Getting our state to recognize that there should be a tax benefit for wildlife improvement is a monumental change. There's been a big push here in Gunnison County, and there's been a big push in all the western counties to try to pull these ranches out of grazing ag and turn them into recreational lands. So the tax numbers are going way, way up on these remote properties. And so then you turn around and somebody's like, okay, I got to go find somebody to come in and graze my ground down to nothing in order to try to maintain or get back my ag status that was withdrawn from my property. And so not only do they lose the opportunity to be a part of what's called the landowner preference program, which is the licenses, if you have 160 consecutive acres and you have wildlife on your ranch on a specific amount of time, you can apply and you're agriculturally zoned then or taxed, then you can apply for the landowner preference program. That puts value back into the landowners to help not be pissed, frankly, that they're wintering our wildlife on their private land. And by going through these tax changes that our counties have gone to try to squeeze out every dollar, we've gotten to the point where we're losing participation in the landowner participation program. We're losing people that value wildlife. Therefore, we start to lose the opportunity to have the wildlife on private lands. So it's a catastrophic mistake that we're making in Colorado in our tax code that doesn't recognize the opportunity for wildlife to be an integral part of what we do. So those are kind of that's a whole lot to cover real quickly, but that kind of gives you some things that we face on a daily basis and some trends that we see that could have huge impacts if we could get some change made. But anyway, any questions at all, guys? Please. Yes, sir.
Lowers the saleable value. Why doesn't that affect the assessed value of the land?
Well, honestly, it should. It's back to the same thing. It's a taxable. We're squeezing you're back to the 82% public in Gunnison County. We're squeezing every dollar we can to try to run our county. Hinsdale County, 97% public. Mineral County, 96% public. Archuleta County, over 80%. So that, unfortunately, the biggest part of that is wanting to get money out of you. The reality of it is, when we look at a ranch that we assess a conservation easement on, we do a 33% diminution in value but when we start the conversation. The real questions come, a conservation easement is a lot like having a crystal ball. You have to be able to look at that easement and plan something that's going to be, you want to protect what you find tangible. Then you want to try to look into the future and say, okay, what are going to be the future highest and best uses of this property other than development? Because you're selling off your diminution in value for development rights. Now, the big picture is making one that someone else can transfer into. And I'll give you a perfect example. We sold 1,704 acres over in Delta County this last year. Conservation easement on it was brilliant. They protected agricultural buildings. They protected a 10-acre building envelope on a 1,700-acre ranch, 2 miles of live water. They allowed any and all wildlife restoration, habitat enhancement, and stream enhancement. That had zero effect on our value selling that ranch. On the other side of that, we sold 4,443 acres called Payne Mesa Ranch over in Unit 40. The conservation easement was so poorly written, you couldn't even camp on your own ground. 5,000 acres and you can't camp on your own ranch. 5,000, it's crazy. And the guy who bought it solely because it had big elk. You're talking about a $6.5 million purchase because it's got 400 class bulls. They went and bought a neighboring $2 million ranch to sleep on so that they could hunt elk on the other ranch. So the conservation easements are absolutely fantastic tools, but just make sure you slow down long enough to really think about, what am I conserving? What are my goals? What are my long-term goals? And what are those long-term goals going to impact in the future when my family gets this? Because no matter how we look at it, we're living on, we're buying, or we're selling a generational property. People are doing this. What I hear almost every single showing is, I'm doing this for my kids. I want to do something that's going to have a long-term impact. One I hear all the time is, I want my kids to get away from a screen. That's a big one for us now. And so when we're selling, when we're showing or we're trying to teach people about the dynamics of a mountain property, one of the key things is you don't have to own the Taj Mahal to live like a king. A little piece of ground here, when you're 82% public, is a damn big purchase. And so when you got, and sometimes it might be as small as 40 acres. A 40-acre piece might have a heck of a lot more sex appeal, if you excuse my term, but might be a really dynamic piece of ground because of its location more than a 700-acre ranch somewhere else. So the times have totally changed for us. We're not selling stuff by AUMs. We're not selling things by, what's our production rates. I mean, in Gunnison County, we're lucky to get 2 tons per acre, and we get 1 cutting. A lot of stuff we'll see, some we might see as high as 2.5 and even 3 on some really productive stuff. But typically we're seeing 1.5 to 2 tons per acre on production. You don't even hardly pay for your hay equipment. I mean, at the end of the day, and believe me, I've done it my whole life. I always want a better tractor. but that being said, it's cheaper to buy hay than it is to grow it. So the dynamics of where we're going in this county is trying to open up our mind to protect the assets that are found valuable, and wildlife is one of them. So it'd be nice to see us kind of bring some awareness to that as time goes by. So that's a whole lot of subjects, you guys, in a real short amount of time. Is there anything else I can help with at all while you got me? Yes, sir.
Wolf introduction in Colorado having on ranch and recreational property.
Well, and lucky I have to give that. I have to start with a bias. I grew up as an outfitter in Colorado, Alaska, and Montana. We owned outfitting businesses in 4 states, and I spent 100 days a year plus in a sleeping bag for 20 years. We watched our moose populations be completely destroyed in Alaska. I mean, literally completely destroyed in Alaska with the wolves. The wolf that they're talking about reintroducing was never here. The wolf that they're bringing in weighs 30% more than the wolf that was historically here. It is not the same predator. It is an apex predator of an epic level. I'll give you an example of one that we looked up the other day. We were working on a Wyoming property. 1999, the GMU that ranch was located in harvested 1,900 elk by rifle. 1,900. Last year, they harvested 12. So when you start talking, those are the numbers, guys. I don't care if you're for the wolf, against the wolf, but if you're going to be for the wolf, you need to look at the numbers. The dynamics are unbelievable. And the Hydacta disease, whole nother conversation. But the first thing is, this is not a species that was here. We'd be way better off with the Mexican wolf coming up from the south. And we're seeing some of that in the south part of this, and some of the ranches we work on near the Gila. And you're talking about an animal that's much more, equal to the historic wolf that was in this country. But this is not the same game. And I don't want to get into politics, but dynamics, there are some benefits to it, Lucky. I mean, you look at the bird populations or you look at the wetland opportunities and restoration in Yellowstone. That herd went from 25,000 coming out of Yellowstone to 2,500. Now that herd's back up to 4,000. So there's some pretty neat, we're starting to get a handle. I don't know if you saw Idaho out just as of yesterday. Idaho put forth 12-month a year wolf season. So they're trying to get control of this again. I was, and let me back up a little bit. I was on the advisory board of the Wildlife Commission for 8 years. I was president of the Colorado Wildlife Federation, president of Sportsmen for Wildlife Restoration. My whole life's been involved politically, and Danny and I have been, God, I don't know how many hundreds of meetings over the years. 12, 14 years ago, whatever that number, time's passing faster than I want to admit, we made a commitment that said we didn't want to allow them to reintroduce the wolf, put in a management plan, because had we put in that management plan 12 years ago or 14 years ago, whatever it was, that would allow them to have the opportunity to transplant wolves. We opened the door. And so the Colorado Parks and Wildlife which is now Colorado Parks and Wildlife, made a decision to not do that, knowing that time would eventually bring the wolf into our back door. And now we have it. We know there's been, I actually have the pictures on my phone of tracks right here in the West Elks. We've got a pack here in the West Elks that haven't been recognized, but we sent the tracks off to to the canine department in Utah and verified that it was wolves. We know we have a pack in the northwest corner up in Unit 210, 201, somewhere right there in that area. That actually could be a godsend because you can't reintroduce something that's already here. And so maybe this mentality of trying to hold off the inevitable will give us a little bit of a tool to manage it when it finally gets here. But it's coming. I mean, there's no question it's coming, and it could have dire effects. I don't want to paint the doom and gloom. I do think there's pros and cons. But anything that's not managed is unmanaged. And so if we bring it in and we don't control it, the day that that man's not a part of those solutions is so far gone. I mean, we are so involved now at this point. Mountain lions, you look at fires, for example. I mean, fire is the best thing that ever happens to us. But now we've got so much fuel. When it does happen, it's an oh my God moment. I mean, it's just like, well, we burned 100. We had 3 ranches burned last year. Those ranches right now are staggering. I mean, you ought to see them. They're absolutely stunning in 1 year. Now, granted, they're in the La Veta Valley. They were in that campfire fire. But we lost a 5,000-acre ranch, one house, a 5,200 square foot home. I found 3 pieces of metal roofing. That's how hot the fire was when it came. I couldn't find a microwave. I couldn't find a refrigerator. Couldn't find a water heater. I found 3 pieces of metal roofing. It burned the cement. It came through so hot. And when you look at that kind of dynamic, we got so much fuel built that we're fearful of it, but we're finally starting to awaken to the benefits of fire. You know, the habitat, we will see 600% grasses come back after a fire, 600% improvement after a fire. And if you get on top of it and you seed after it, you know, we see that glazing that happens. It gives us about a 3-year window of problems, especially runoff. Runoff's our big issue. It's not the fire, it's the rains and the floods that come after them. But anyway, golly, I didn't mean to get off on so many things. I apologize. But anybody else have any? Does that help, Lucky, at all? I think from a sportsman standpoint, it's going to have dire impacts. Long term, if we can end up with some balance, you know, you look at chronic wasting disease and you think, okay, well, maybe there's a solution there to help chronic wasting disease. But they're finding in the areas with wolves and chronic wasting disease, we haven't seen any depletion of spread of chronic wasting disease. So that, unfortunately, had that potential positive hasn't proven out. So I think there's a whole lot more negative known than there is positive. Well, guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. We got some magazines on the back for M4 Ranch Group if you guys are interested in looking at those.
And you'll hang around for just a little bit after a few more speakers.